Hi, this is John Freeman. I'm the executive director of the Great Lakes Renewable Energy Association. I want to welcome everybody to our Thursday night Michigan Solar Story. We appreciate you attending these events where we learn about solar and have an opportunity to ask questions. Tonight, we have a gentleman named Frank Krawczel of the AES Corporation. Frank is the Senior Development Manager, and he works to put together large solar projects in Michigan. And he's going to be talking tonight about the Thorn Lake Solar Project, which is located in Manchester Township. But before we turn it over to Frank, I just want to thank our sponsors for this evening's program. We have the Michigan Department, Great Lakes and Energy, Eagle, Homeland Solar, McNaughton McKay, Iron Ridge Racking, and finally Harvest Solar. And I also want to make a plug for becoming a member of GLREA if in fact you're not currently a member. We're a 501c3, primarily an educational organization. We're a membership-based organization, and our budget comes from large part from our membership dues. And our dues are as low as $30 per year for an individual or $250 for a business. And of course, they're tax deductible because we're a 501c3. So we're going to have Frank talk for about 20 or half hour or however long about the Thorn Lake project, and then we'll open up for questions. So we're very happy to have Frank join us. So take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Yeah, and thank you all GLREA members for having us. AES, I think we've been members since 2020, but this is just a way for us to pay it back. GLREA has been a tremendous partner as we've worked in the state of Michigan, and yeah, really appreciate you all and your support moving forward. So we like to sponsor events and pay it back. And one of the main reasons why I wanted to provide an update for Thorn Lake Solar specifically, one, this project has been a marathon. If any of you all have been tracking it, it's been by far the most challenging project I've ever worked on, and hopefully they aren't all like this moving forward. They might be. The solar industry is definitely shaping up to become more contentious, unfortunately, around utility scale. But one thing that we did find is that people are watching your videos. And I think that I gave a Thorn Lake presentation about a year ago, maybe over a year ago. And we've heard of folks passing that information along. So instead of asking John to erase that old video because it had old information and it's not really representative of what the project is now, after all the iterations we've gone through with the township, instead we wanted to provide an update on the project and show you, from where we started to where we are now, because it has been quite the journey. So it's a little bit more context. I am not based out of Michigan. I'm in Salt Lake. We do have some beautiful mountains in the background, if you can see that. And I have spent probably about a quarter of my life in 2022 in the state of Michigan. So hopefully one day you all will accept me as one of you. Or maybe I need a couple more years.
Can you sing the fight song at University of Michigan? If you
well,
can, then you'll be an honorary member.
One of our developers actually went to MSU, so I don't think I'm allowed to. Is my presentation still up? Because Zoom is not telling me it is. Okay, great. That is what we don't want to show you. 1 second. This is, okay, we're going this direction. All right, so just a little bit about AES. So I have to give the plug for AES. We're an independent power producer. Meaning we're an owner and operator of renewable energy projects. So we've been operating in the United States since 1981. AES itself is a large corporation, many business units across the world. We're a Fortune 500 company, but I work specifically with AES Clean Energy. So I actually started, and when we became members of GLREA, we were S-Power. That S-Power company merged with AES Distributed Energy to form AES Clean Energy. And that's the business unit that is focused on renewable energy development and owning and operating in the United States specifically. And we're viewed as kind of one of the main units that's projected for growth in the future for the company. So they're really counting on us and our success. So we have over 400 operating solar facilities in the United States. We're really shaping up to become one of the largest renewable energy companies in the country. So it's a real pleasure, and it's been great working with this company, and just the ability to have resources behind you to get things done. And we really saw that for Thorn Lake Solar. Another nice feature is that Thorn Lake Solar is the 4th project. We have 3 other projects that I've been working on. So I myself had started working on these 3 other projects, and now they're operating. So it's been really special to see how they've how those projects have shaped up through time. And now we have asset managers on those projects. So 3 operating, 2 in Southeast Michigan, 1 Western Allegheny County. So we have some history in the state, and we're honestly not going anywhere. We're sticking around. Michigan is one of our key focuses for core states for growth, specifically in the MISO region, which is where I work. So a lot of this information is probably something that you all have seen if you've tracked the project, but just to mention it again, it's in Manchester Township in Washtenaw County. It's 20 megawatt project of alternating current. So we deal with an inverter load ratio, and it's around 26 megawatts of DC power. It's on 159 acres, and the electricity produced will be sold to Consumers Energy. And then what that electricity is equal to is about 5,000 homes. So the population of Manchester Township is around 4,700. So, this project is unique because we're almost matching pretty much the demand within the township with the generation that this project will have. So it's pretty cool when you think about it like that. And then just to add, to put it in perspective, the greenhouse gas emissions, although this stat is changing as we have more EVs on the road, but it's equal to 6,000 cars driven for 1 year. Now, in terms of timing, we're currently working on a 30% design set. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call are familiar with, how you progress an engineering design to get it to a point where you have a plan set that you can build from. And we're at 30%, we're heading to 60 after that, 90, and then issue for construction. Once we finish up our 30% design, we're going to kick off our engineering procurement construction firm RFP. So we're going to be soliciting different contractors to build this site. That's going to happen here March, April timeframe. And that also brings opportunities for other contractors more local to subcontract with that EPC firm that we'll hire. So that is often a good opportunity for local businesses. Start of construction, it could change here. We're looking at fall of 2023. We might get some civil work done in the fall. If not, it's really dependent on this EPC that we hire and what their preference is, but they might choose to start in the spring of 2024. Regardless, we want to have this project up and running by the end of 2024. So that's that construction completion. We also call that the commercial operation date. Now, in terms of details, so, pretty straightforward. It's PV photovoltaics that we'll be using. The piles, they won't have foundations. So that's one common misconception that we see when folks talk about these projects, is that they're going to have concrete foundations. It's going to be tremendous amount of impervious surface all over the place. It's going to be a drainage and SWIP disaster. That's not the case. We're dealing with perennial grasses under our panels, and really the impacted area is just where that pile is sitting, that small H pile. It's going to be single axis trackers. So, I feel like I'm speaking with more industry experts than what I would typically speaking to in a general crowd. But I'm sure that you all are familiar with how the trackers will rotate throughout the day on a north-south axis and follow the sun. I think that they rotate to about a 60-degree angle at max each day. So that will really determine the height of the panel, ranging from 5 to 10 feet. One unique thing that we're doing on this project site that we haven't done before on the other 3 project sites is this agricultural style fence. And that was actually feedback from a specific neighbor to this project who directed us, to incorporate that in our design. So we're happy to do that. It's gonna have wooden posts, woven wire, so it'll really match the surrounding uses of just, rural area. Current use is ag, and it'll look a lot better, I think, than a chain link fence. I did skip over the tracker, but it can handle up to 105 mile-an-hour winds. And another thing that we did was adding rules around our design. This was specific in our amendment, which I'll get to later, but we really went through a couple iterations on this project with the public to get it to a point where it could actually be accepted. Again, very strenuous process, but we got there eventually. One thing that we applied was, no panels within 100 feet of a residence. That was just based on the reports that we were reading, based on property impact reports, and really, if you stay outside of that 100-foot zone, you're really not going to impact property values in rural areas. So that's why we applied that. We also applied a rule around having a double row of evergreen screen for any residences that existed within 300 feet of any PV equipment. So we're really just focused on the visual aspect of the project and making sure that those neighbors who would be living closer to the project are screened from it. So when they wake up in the morning, they'll see trees ideally versus, solar panels. I think they're beautiful, but a lot of other folks don't. So. And just to add, the changes we did make, we added a ton of trees in our enhanced landscape screen. And really the net positive will be over 500 trees added to the area. But, all that to say, this project did have its challenges. If you were tracking it, it's pretty easy to follow this project. These are all MLive updates, news reports. We really went through the through the ringer on this project. And again, we got there eventually, but things like neighbors blast, proposed Washtenaw County solar farm as eyesore. Yeah, and that's me in front of a bunch of folks in town hall, trying to convince them that this project is a good project, and they would beg to differ. So it was quite the experience, but again, we kind of took a different direction with this project where we were able to reach a consent judgment. It's not the ideal path for a solar project, but we did get there eventually. So here's mapping out exactly what that process looked like. So it was really most of 2022 that we were working on this project. And again, this is not your ideal path for success, but we submitted our application in February of 2022, and we had our first public hearing April of 2022. Ideally, you're getting your approval, maybe not in the first public hearing, but ideally the second one. Typically, townships like to hear a project for the first time in that public hearing, get oriented with the project, hear neighbors' concerns, and then they can make a final decision in that second public hearing. We did that. The issue being that we got a denial on our second public hearing. But what we did in between those two public hearings is we made an amendment to our project, because that April hearing is when that news article came out about Washtenaw County neighbors call this project an eyesore. So, we heard the concerns from the community, and we tried to adapt with it in the concerns that we're hearing. There was also a lot of misinformation that was being spread. That's something that we're seeing a lot more of in our industry, in the utility scale sphere. And, it's really just meant to rile up folks. I think, folks who are spreading that information, they probably know that what they're spreading is misinformation, but it's effective. It's highly effective in getting people upset around a project. So that amendment that I mentioned, things that we made changes to were our site plan. So I'll get into the details later, but we made some pretty dramatic changes. Another thing we did was changing our landscape plan. Again, we went from very localized landscape screening or very specific landscape screening to certain areas of the project, having pretty much trees all around the entire site. Again, over 500 trees are going to be planted at this site. So I think it's impressive. We did a property tax analysis, impact analysis. So I was just showing the benefit that this project was going to have with personal property and real property taxes. And then we did a property value impact report. Impact to property values was a big thing that neighbors were concerned of. I can't blame them. I think that's one of the first things that typically comes up with these projects. So we had two consultants do two reports that were site specific that had a different methodology that both arrived at the same conclusion that this project will have no impact to property values. Another thing that we included were third-party reports just addressing the concerns that we're hearing from the neighbors around noise, electromagnetic fields, so EMFs, heat island effect, glare, and then general health and safety with regards to fires and how flammable the equipment is, how toxic they are, and what's the likelihood of leaching into soils and whatnot. The answer is it's not a concern, but it's very difficult for someone like me to come to a community and say it's not a big deal. We want to provide the information that backs up our statements, and that's what we did. So in those changes that we made in the amendment, just making a few highlights here. So again, in our original plan, we had proposed that chain link fence. Electric code states that you can have a 6-foot chain link fence with 3 strands of barbed wire, 1 foot. And that hits essentially your 7-foot requirement for a fence. It's a very common thing that the industry uses, and we threw away that proposed fence and brought in an agricultural fence with wooden post and woven wire. So again, I think that'll match the surrounding area a lot better. The panel height, so this one really blew up in our faces. In the original plan, we added 2 portrait module heights, so two modules stacked on top of each other. The system that we're thinking about specifically is called Soltech. So you have a taller racking system, greater spacing, and the visual concern of that is tremendous, right? Really tall panels, it's very difficult to screen those. You need to have mature trees. It's very difficult to find trees to plant, especially evergreens, over 6 feet in day one. So it's until a few years, you're not really doing much in terms of the screen with a 16-foot tall panel. In reality, those sit about just over 14 feet, but we wanted to have some contingency for, sloping and undulations. That'll increase the height if you have, downward slope, but the racking can't necessarily follow that slope just with the constraints of the material. All that to say, we went to a 1 portrait height, reduced the height significantly, and you'll see it in our visual simulations just by doing that, what it does. On a side note, the 2 portrait height, when we talk about agrivoltaics, I do think that is probably going to be one of the best solutions in terms of incorporating crops with getting solar panels on a utility scale solar site. Just because you have higher clearances to work under, and you're also going to have greater spacing for rows. But that wasn't what we were going for on this project specifically. We're focusing on agricultural uses in the buffer areas, but not under panel specifically. Again, I mentioned about the panel placement. We just set guidelines around that, which didn't exist originally. For the greenbelt width, so that is the area that we're allocating for our landscape screen, essentially from the property boundary or easement boundary, whatever is the start of our buildable area. We have 30 feet instead of 20 feet. 20 feet was the ordinance. We expanded to 30 feet, and then we have our fence at the back of that. And in between, we have our landscape screen. So we're just getting our panels farther away from the roads, the property boundaries, really focused on that visual impact. In terms of plant list, I don't know if this is honestly the best attribute of the project, but it is a change we made, and it was a change that we made in response to the feedback that we received from the neighbors. So originally we had proposed, a mix of evergreens and deciduous trees with shrubs, really good variety. The feedback that we received was any deciduous tree is going to lose their leaves, of course, right? And it's not going to serve as a screen in the wintertime. So they wanted to see evergreens. We went back to evergreens, and that's what we're proposing now, to, again, align with what the neighbors wanted to see. Screening location, we have it around the entire project site. Didn't have much in the beginning. 2 rows of evergreen screen. We really had it just in one area. We have it in a lot of areas now, and we have it in any area where panels might be closer to a home. The plant spacing, this is actually surprisingly more impactful than you would think. So you'll actually see it in some of the visual simulations here soon, but yeah, all we're doing is just making that screen more dense. And when you're making it more dense, when you get a 5-year growth, those branches are starting to extend to the point that you're creating a wall, a vegetative wall of screen. So I think it looks really nice. And then the planting replacement, we were just keeping our landscaping plan consistent with what was required in the ordinance of replacing trees within 2 years. And we've pushed it back or moved it into 1-year requirement just to, show that we have an interest in replacing the trees in a timely manner. And that was just some insurance that the township and the neighbors would have. So here's just, a visual example of the differences that we made. So up top is, that original plan, the 2-panel height, this, I want to say that this is projecting panels about 800 feet into the distance, and they stick out quite a bit still with that 2-panel height, that Soltech design that I was talking about. You can see here, you're starting to see the wooden posts on the ag fence. We didn't have much of a screen. Now we have screening all around in the front. We have a driveway, so that's why there's a gap. And just dropping the panel height in general, it makes a huge change in terms of visual screening. Here you do see that panel height change again. Up top, 2-panel height. Here's where you see your 30-foot spacing, and then down below you have your 20-foot spacing. So same 5-year growth plan, but having it 20 feet apart versus 30, significant difference. And then just dropping your panel height in general. The trees are actually growing quite a bit over the panels versus they were just barely growing taller than the panels in the original plan. So those are all the changes that we made to the amendment, which led into a denial, unfortunately, of the project. When we had the denial, we then filed an appeal through circuit court, and that appeal led into consent judgment negotiations with the township board specifically. So the township, they drove a hard bargain, was actually really impressed with the things that they proposed. And I really think that it led to this project being a much better project. So although the process in itself, you never want to go through that, I'm happy with where we landed on these conditions to better support the township and also enhance the project even more. So things that we agreed on. So we added some more landscaping screening in addition to what I just presented to you. There's a corner where it's a main thoroughfare, and they just wanted to have people see trees on both sides of the road versus just one side, which we had originally proposed. They limited construction hours to 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then the pile driving, which is something that was really focused on in our public hearings about how that's going to last for a whole year, and it's going to be extremely loud. And someone got up on the stand and pounded the podium, and it was really dramatic. In reality, that's going to last around a month long, but they did set constraints on when we can actually do that pile driving. So that's 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. And I think that's a good working time. And when folks are getting back home, we're done with the loudest activity during construction. And we are permitted to do some makeup work on Saturdays, but that has to be approved by the township in advance. So that's, again, just making sure that we're not out on site doing construction activities when folks are at home trying to enjoy their homes. Something that we also agreed to, which is very common with these projects, is that we agreed to improve Herman Road if there were any damages to during construction. It's a gravel road, so it's easily susceptible to that. And they're also requiring us to have sheep grazing or pollinators, well, or beekeeping mainly, or specifically on site, which we have a preference to do sheep grazing if it is available. One challenge that we're finding in southeastern Michigan is just finding someone who is willing to have do sheep grazing on our sites. So if anyone here knows someone or is someone that has sheep and would like to do business, we have this project and we have 2 operating sites already that are ready for you. The grasses need to be kept below 12 inches. That is a very easy thing for us to agree to. We have insurance requirements too on our projects, so we have to have spacing from the tallest blade of grass to the bottom of our panel. We have to be compliant with our insurance provider, because if we don't, then we have problems. So this was a very easy thing for us to agree to. Noise kept on coming up over and over again. So we agreed to keeping our electrical equipment below 45 decibels. And in addition to that, we agreed to a $50,000 payment for infrastructure improvements. So that is, infrastructure improvements is meant to be very broad, that the township can just use at their own discretion for whatever they see fit. It doesn't have to be something specific to the project or the impact that the project may have. It can be for anything that they think they need it for. I think that this last item is what got us over the hump in actually getting this project approved, but I'm not sure if we'll ever be able to do it again. But what it is right now there's the PILT legislation that some of you all might be familiar with, and it's a payment in lieu of taxes, gets a reduced rate on personal property taxes payment requirement for utility scale solar projects. And it's working through legislation right now. We're not even sure if it's going to go or not, but if it does, and we in the future would be responsible for paying less taxes than what are required now when we sign the consent judgment, we would then have to provide a secondary payment to the township to backfill those loss in tax revenues that they would have otherwise gained. So it essentially sets what we had projected to maintain throughout the entire project life, and any loss in tax revenues, the township is guaranteed in the future, which is incredible. It was an incredible negotiation by the township for them to get that. And again, I'm reluctant to say that we'll be able to do that in the future, but for this one, we were able to make it work, and I'm happy that we did. In terms of project life cycle, so again, we're going to start construction here, maybe the end of this year or the beginning of next. We estimate to have 150 construction workers, and that construction timeline could adjust depending on when we start. But again, we got to get this project operational by the end of 2024. We have a contractual obligation at this time to get that project delivered. Operations will include a 4-person crew. I think the likely case is that this 4-person crew will be used throughout our 4 projects around Michigan, performing routine maintenance, site inspections and whatnot. So that, we gain some efficiencies there. And the building I'm actually in has a control room. So they monitor all of our projects across the United States in this building 24/7, 365 days a year. So if anything goes offline, we know about it, and we're able to dispatch those crews and get them on site to troubleshoot the issue. So that is a very common thing with all utility scale solar projects. In addition to all that, we do coordinate with local fire. There's also requirements in the consent judgment in terms of coordinating with the fire department to make sure that we have good circulation around the project site, internal circulation, so then they can get their fire trucks around if there were to be an event, but ideally not. The lighting also is just mentioning this because it's really a non-disturbance. It's motion censored. It's going to be pointed away from neighbors downward. That was just a concern that was brought up by some neighbors, and it's something that we kept on harping on, just to remind folks that this is really intended to be a quiet neighbor. And once we actually get these operational, you really can see that it's not impacting neighbors in terms of noise, visual, lighting, all those things are well mitigated. Okay, and then this is really my last slide, but just wanted to touch on, bring it back around to vegetation management. The reason that you all probably know just as well as me, the reason that these projects work economically is because the operational costs are low. They require minimal maintenance, and that's why we're able to get so many projects on the grid. In terms of actual vegetation, perennial grasses, and then herbicides, they're used just for spot treatments. It's not the mass application that you get with the current ag use that you have on this parcel right now. A fun little side note, I think once every decade or 5 years, this site in the past has actually been crop dusted with fungicides. So they've had aerial spraying of fungicides. So that is something we would never do while we're operating a solar farm. And just in terms of, if you think about a neighbor living next to a project site and being worried about this type of thing, the impact that a solar farm has compared to, a commercial operating, an ag use, a large scale ag use, our impact is much less. And then we traditionally have a vegetation management plan on all our projects, just to make sure that everything is properly managed. Again, if you all know someone that have sheep and looking to do business, we're all ears. We're still looking for someone in southeastern Michigan. If we can make it work, we'll have it on this site. We also have pollinators incorporated on this site within our landscape screen that I mentioned to you all. And another unique thing that we're doing this project site that we haven't done before in Michigan is we intend to allocate about 6 acres, I think a little bit more than that, to essentially have at a reduced, very cheap rate for a local farmer to come in and use that area for farming still. So I think that will really bring in, the same use that project or that parcel has, and kind of bolster that aspect still, which I think will be really nice if we can make it work. It's all dependent on if we have a farmer who's willing to work with us on that. So that's all I have. I'm willing to take questions right now. And if you'd like to visit our project site, there it is up on the screen, aes.com, Thorn Lake Solar. And there's my email if you'd like to reach out. And before I pass it on, I just want to say thank you all to John and Lee specifically as well, and all the other folks, all the members here who have come to our public hearings, showed your support. I don't think that this project would be where it is now without you all. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Frank, for your presentation. And I also want to recognize that Wayne Appleyard, whom I don't think he's on tonight, but he came out to all 3 of the public hearings with me and spoke and really helped out as well. So we'll open up for questions right now. Let me just first take one from the chat. This is from Bill. Do you have an end-of-life management plan for the decommissioned panels? And 30 some odd years?
Yeah, we do. And I left that off of the PowerPoint. It's becoming more and more of a standard for all of our projects. But we did submit a decommissioning plan with our project, and we're going to update that. And that's actually required in the consent judgment, and we'll have to post a bond with it as well.
Sounds great. Frank, maybe you can take down the screen, and so we can see everybody. So why don't we got a few questions. Go ahead, Carol. Carol Fletcher.
Unmute.
Carol, are you on mute still? Okay, we'll get back to Carol. How about Lee Andre? You have a question for Frank?
Well, I want to ask him if he's planning to attend at the Rosemont in Chicago, the summit coming up on agrivoltaics. This is the Solar Farm Summit. It's at the Rosemont, just beside O'Hare Airport. And it looks like it's the first time that the nation has gotten together specifically to talk about agrivoltaics.
That's awesome. When is it?
The 13th, 14th, and 15th of March. And
okay.
if you come to the networking dinner on the evening of the 13th, you'll hear me make a 10-minute presentation.
Awesome. Thanks for letting me know about that. I'll take a look.
I'll send you the website is Solar Farm Summit.
Sounds great.
Got it.
Carol, are you ready now? Okay, let's go to John Sarver. Lee, why don't you lower your hand?
Hey, Frank, can you talk a little about recycling of panels at the end of their life? Does your company have a strategy or an approach?
Yeah, so there's a few, just want to make sure I was off mute. A few companies that are working on that and improving it. You know, there's been a lot of discussion around reuse. You know, I'm also aware of, you know, a nonprofit that reuses solar modules and, you know, distributes them to low-income communities, which is a great reuse. We Recycle Panels, or We Recycle Solar, is a company that we've used in the past, that we include in our decommissioning plan, just to be able to show the value in recycling and salvaging of the panels. And I know that SIA is also leading an initiative as well to make that a little bit more accessible for the industry. Because, you know, one thing's for certain, maybe the demand doesn't exist now, but the demand is going to be tremendous, you know, 25 years from now, once all these projects start being decommissioned. And that'll definitely drive the economy to have better resources around it.
Yeah, there's some discussions going on in Michigan about what to do about, you know, recycling of panels at the end of their life. And the West Michigan, I think, Business Council is talking about it. The Michigan Energy Office is talking about it. And so we're trying to, I think folks are trying to get ahead of the curve on it because they know that it's coming. Carol posted a question in the chat. For the sheep grazing, does either party pay the other, or is it quid pro quo, or how would that work, Frank?
Yeah, we would pay the sheep rancher, I think is the preferred term. So yeah, you know, really the decision is, will paying a sheep rancher be cheaper than paying someone to go mow this? And typically, yes, it is cheaper to have sheep on instead.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Sounds great.
So I have a question, John.
Go ahead, Marcia. Then we'll get to Shirley. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I can wait.
Okay.
Want me to go?
Well, why don't we go? Let's go with Shirley, and then we'll go to Marcia, and then we'll go to Nicola.
Nikki. You just say Nikki.
Beautiful. Go ahead, Shirley.
Okay, I'd just like to know, what is the decibel level of the inverters?
If you're standing right next to them?
Well, yeah, pretty much. Well, within like 50 feet.
Yeah, it depends on the manufacturer. I don't want to say a number and have to eat crow later, so I'll refrain from saying that. I know okay, I'll say a number. I think it's around, maybe 50 or 60, but as you get farther away, and that's really what we're looking at, is what will that decibel rating be at the property line? That's when you're getting below, background level noises. And inverters are traditionally designed to the interior of the project site because they're collecting all that DC around the array. So it's very uncommon to have them on the perimeter of a project. They're typically going to be right in the center of the parcel, surrounded by hundreds of panels. So there's some sound buffering there as well.
And plus, I would imagine that as the trees mature and you get that more solid wall, that's going to help dampen the sound as well.
Yep. Yeah, and to be honest with you, inverters are viewed as I think the main offender, but it really isn't. The main equipment that is loudest on a project site is the project substation and that main power transformer specifically, where you're collecting all that medium voltage. Yeah, and then you're stepping up that voltage to that higher voltage. So, if you can compare it to, project substation or a substation just around our grid and stand next to it, and you can kind of get a sense for how loud those are. And it's not loud at all, but that's the loudest equipment.
Well, another question that came up in another meeting here in Livingston County was not only the decibel level, but also what you couldn't hear, because she was a sound expert of some sort. And she said that it's not only what you can hear, but what you don't hear. And just because you don't hear it doesn't mean it doesn't affect you and or wildlife. For example, dogs have a higher, they can hear much better than people. So, and then other animals are probably in the same position as dogs. So, would that impact them as well? So what would you say to noise that humans don't normally hear?
Yeah, and we've had this question raised before. Yeah, it really is, in terms of what the equipment is actually doing, once you're getting out to 300 feet, which is a likely case for how far this equipment's set back, it really is not impactful at all.
Well, will it affect the sheep, for example?
No, we have no issues with sheep grazing and sound levels with that regard. We have very happy sheep under our panels. I can tell you that.
It's a beautiful thing. Marcia, go ahead.
Yeah, I have some simple questions. That was interesting, though. What is the orientation of this setup? I mean, in terms of north, south, and so on. And also, I was concerned about the shade that the trees might, when they get bigger, impact the amount of energy that you can generate. And also, I would like to say that, of course, when the sun isn't out, you're not going to get any noise, and you're not going to get any.
That's for certain.
So so it's going to be quiet.
Yeah, when you're trying to sleep. So the orientation is north-south. So you have those trackers that are positioned north-south, and then they're rotating east-west, following the sun. In terms of shading, so we use a tool called PVSYST, and it models our revenues, right? It models the amount of production that we're going to have annually, and we transpose that onto what we're selling the power for. And it's capable of taking into account any existing trees that are there, which is something that we plan to keep the trees that are there, and then also any landscape screen. It's going to take a few years for them to get to that, but that's also something that we can incorporate in the design, and then ultimately into our production, our revenues, and determine if this is actually an economically viable project or not, based on all that information.
Okay, thank you.
Nikki?
Yeah, I have two completely unrelated questions. The first one, it looked in your pictures like it was grass between the panels, probably some sort of native grass. What about flowers so that you can be attracting pollinators using native plants? For flowers. And then the second unrelated question to that is, what do you do in Michigan? I have solar panels on my house. In January, I'm lucky to get 31 kilowatt hours. And in summer, I get 500. That's a hell of a discrepancy. I don't understand how these solar farms can be consistent.
So we're certainly producing less. We're producing less power in the winter. Absolutely. Yeah, there's less solar production hours throughout the day. So that is, it's something that we bake into our financial model. Typically, our production is viewed on an annual basis. MISO does have some standards with capacity around when you're producing power during a certain span of hours in a season. In Thorn Lake Solar specifically will actually be viewed in that regard. Some of our revenues are determined by what our capacity is, in the hours of 15 through 17 in each season or of the year, and then it changes for the winter as well. Your first question. What was
Native flowers.
Flowers, okay. Yeah, so we traditionally keep pollinators to our buffer areas. So that's what we're doing on this project. We're keeping it to kind of around that screen, and that makes it a lot easier just for us to manage it. Incorporating pollinators, we're doing this on Cement City. It takes a couple years to establish. So, you have to apply herbicides so you're not, getting overrun with weeds, and then, having those plantings and then making sure that you're actually getting the pollinators established over the next few years to where they're, outgrowing any competitors. All that to say, that's why sheep are so compatible with these project sites, especially for using grasses under panel, just because that's a much easier cover underneath our panels. And if we have flowers, then we have sheep coming in and eating all our flowers. You also have, I think, some constraints with specific to clovers too, and some that might be actually dangerous for sheep to consume. So you have to consider that as well.
And we want to make sure those sheep are happy. We heard that earlier. So Susan, do you have a question or two?
Yes, I do. I know a farmer that has a lot of acres that he's not planting anymore. He's a big fruit farmer here, but he's got a ton of acreage, and he's interested in doing a solar farm. How do you go looking for the acreage, or do you have farmers coming to you? How would this man look into this?
It works both ways. We actually, especially when we have events like this or, a public hearing, our name gets out, people get interested, and we'll actually get a couple emails. It's not uncommon. I think John's actually, have run a few folks our way, and we'll, take a look and see if there's any potential there. It is a little bit of a needle in a haystack, but oftentimes, most of the projects are built where we're reaching out to farmers specifically because we've identified a specific spot on the grid that we want to locate a project. But we will take any suggestions, any folks that are interested any day. So please pass it along.
I will.
So that's why people should copy down Frank's email address, and so you can send him an email directly. I have one question I want to ask, and then we'll probably wrap it up with a couple other quick comments from the chat. Both Consumers Energy and DTE, they've been submitting their integrated resource plans to the Public Service Commission on how they plan on generating energy for the next 5 to 10 years. And there's a shift going on between closing down coal plants and building more renewables and more wind farms. So is AES planning on doing more of these projects in Michigan? And I hope you do, but can you give us any indication whether you're looking for new projects in Michigan for consumers or DTE?
Yeah, so we're getting a little bit out of my realm, which is pure project development, and focus on getting solar panels in the ground in a certain area and more into the strategy side of things. But, we're focused on one project in the future, and we're prospecting more. And, in addition to these utilities trying to decommission their coal plants, it's certainly a strategy that we're trying to pursue in terms of having a capacity replacement for that coal generation. An added benefit is that with the IRA that was just passed, oftentimes that would be considered an energy community as well. So that gets you an additional 10% on the investment tax credit. So that is going to be, those areas will be hit hard by our industry in the next few years.
Sounds great. Okay, a couple of quick final questions from the chat. Jim asked whether you need to clean the panels every so often from the dust. And then a person who RCT 6213W22, he asked whether AES ever looks at vertical or bifacial setups as a part of your projects.
Yeah, so bifacial is pretty much a standard at this point for our projects. So we'll have bifacial modules on Thorn Lake Solar. For the other Michigan projects, this was pre-IRA passing. We had to safe harbor some panels that were not bifacial. So you actually get like a 70-30 blend of 70 bifacial modules on a lot of our projects, and then some that are not. So that's a little interesting tidbit. And then in terms of panel washing, the climate in Michigan is wet enough to where we do not have to do panel washing.
Do you ever have problems with turkeys or birds hanging out on them?
Not we'll call that soiling. And it's actually there's like a soiling factor baked into our PV-Sys, our production model. So we just assume that birds will do their duty to a certain percentage and reduce our production to a certain percentage. But generally, once
you go out and inspect them regularly to see if there are any dumpings on them, or
take them off.
Yeah, that I would say yes, but not maybe to the extent that you might be thinking. We're carefully looking at each one and maybe scrubbing them down. We're looking for what our monitoring system will tell us in terms of if there's a loss of production in a specific location, a specific string, and then we'll go identify from there what the problem could be.
But I'm assuming, Frank, that if you get a good solid rainstorm, which happens every so often, that will clean the panels of any of the soiling that goes on.
Yeah, and snow is really the best, because it's like a sponge that just scrapes off all of that stuff from the panels.
Okay, super. Any last final questions or comments for Frank from anybody?
Well, is there any thought of using batteries in any way in connection with these projects or not? Is that something that the utility would have to do?
Yeah. So not Thorn Lake Solar specifically. We've been working on Thorn Lake since early 2019. But now any project that we're really looking at in the future that we're filing in the MISO queue position has some battery component typically. So it's certainly the future. You're going to see pretty much on every project 7 years from now.
That's terrific. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I think it was a wonderful presentation, and I'm just really impressed with Frank and the AES Corporation for starting off with a certain project, and then after receiving all this feedback from the local community, they proved that they want to be a good corporate partner because they made some fundamental changes to their project, and it's clearly proved that they care about the community they're going to be a part of for the next 30 some odd years, and they listened and they made changes. And so when you hear about companies and how they want to work with the local community, it's clear to me that AES is a corporation that you absolutely can work with. And so I'm really happy to have a pleasure of meeting Frank and his team over the last few years. And we're really pleased that they become part of the GLREA family. So thank you very much, Frank, for making the presentation, for joining us. And thanks for everybody else for coming back on. And who knows, we may have Frank come back in a year or so. And maybe at some point, no guarantees, but maybe we could do a field trip out to Manchester and maybe check out the site at some point, because I think that would be fascinating for all of us. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. And I think we may not be having a solar story next week, but stay tuned for announcements and we'll keep you posted. And again, for anybody that's not a member of